Conversation and introducing our guests. Roger Cohen is a columnist for the New York Times. His opinion pieces on global affairs and international diplomacy appear every Tuesday and Friday on the op-ed pages of the paper of record. He is also the author of several books. His most recent, a beautiful memoir, The Girl from Human Street, which was published last year. Ari Shavit is a longtime columnist and member of the editorial board of Haaretz newspaper. His best-selling and widely acclaimed book, My Promised Land, is now being made into an HBO documentary. Welcome to both of you. So the framework for tonight's conversation is the question, can the Jewish narrative be revived? The complex and changing US-Israel relationship, and there is a lot of ground to cover tonight, gentlemen, but the topic that we absolutely must begin with, which is the one that is most timely, most topical, of course, is Iran. So, Roger, as you said only 2 days ago in your most recent op-ed, Iran is now open for business. Sanctions have been rolled back. Tens of billions of dollars are now being transferred into Iranian hands. The two of you have been on opposite sides of this issue. Roger, you've been an avid supporter of the deal. You've called this a moment of guarded hope, a time to imagine the possibility of transformative change. Some would say that your enthusiasm for this deal could be a little bit premature, and that your optimism is both dangerous and a little bit naive. Your response?
Thank you, Linda.
I told you I was going to be scrappy tonight.
I'm so pleased you're easing into this conversation. Before I get to your immediate question, I would just like to say how much I liked and enjoyed My Promised Land, and the really quite breathtaking and riveting early chapters in particular struck me, and there's one phrase that has remained on my mind ever since I read it. It's where you're describing the expulsion of the Arab community from Lydda. And you write something like, either reject Zionism because of Lydda, or accept Zionism with Lydda. And I'd never seen so rivetingly expressed this core dilemma of the state of Israel. And as I explain in my book, I accept Israel with Lydda. I accept Zionism with Lydda. And so my dismay was redoubled when, toward the end of the book, this liberal Israeli writer whom I didn't know, but whom I'd grown to love through these chapters, and whom I'd agreed with on really everything almost, suddenly veered off into this strange discourse about Iran. I can't remember its precise details, but it involved circles of fear, circles of threat, Iran possibly about to destroy this powerful state of Israel that Ari had described so powerfully, vividly, evocatively. And I found myself shaking my head and thinking, gosh, how is this possible? How can this man that I agree with almost about everything have such a different view on Iran? And that's what we're about to explore. To your question, I don't think I'm naive. I spoke about guarded hope. And anybody looking at the Iran deal and looking at what might happen over the next decade or 15 years has to acknowledge that it could all come apart. The Iranians could cheat. This hopeful society with a large, highly educated, young population that is generally pro-American, they could fail entirely to benefit from the greater contact with the world that is being brought about through this deal, and the gradual changes in Iran and in Iranian society that will prise open this extremely repressive regime at times, may not come to pass. But I think any rational human being has to argue that the chances are greater of greater moderation emerging in Iran over the 15-year period of the deal than it would be without the deal. An Iran that is cornered, an Iran that is a pariah state, an Iran that is outside the tent, in my view, is far more dangerous than an Iran that very slowly is being drawn out of that isolation. And anybody who looks at the deal, and I'm not drawing an exact parallel or even perhaps a vague parallel, but there's something there. Anybody who looks at the China deal in 1974, which ended the diplomatic rupture between the United States and China, has to recognize that there was really nothing there, very little there, except the idea that China and the United States would be better off with some kind of relationship than with none. And look what has emerged from all of that. And we've already seen that this deal is not hermetic. We've seen 10 sailors released within 24 hours. We've seen a financial dispute that dated back 34 years overcome. Is this deal ideal? No, of course it's not. But diplomacy deals with the real world. And until 2 years ago, any friend of Israel, and I'm one, would have been deeply concerned by the fact that the number of centrifuges in Iran had increased exponentially to almost 20,000. At Arak, they seem to be developing a possible plutonium route to a bomb. They were closer and closer to being able to break out and reach, build one device within an estimated 2 to 3 months. And it was only through diplomacy, only through this deal, Linda, that all this has been reversed. There are now 6,000 centrifuges instead of almost 20,000. All the highly enriched uranium has been shipped out of Iran. It's gone. The low enriched uranium is virtually gone too. The plutonium route to a bomb has been cut off. Iran, by any strategic estimate, is now much further from the possibility of building that single device than it was. How, ladies and gentlemen, is this bad for Israel? Explain to me, how is this bad for Israel that Iran, through this deal, in the real world, with the impossibility of the complete dismantlement that Prime Minister Netanyahu kept asking for, it's not going to happen. Iran has mastered the nuclear fuel cycle. You can't bomb that knowledge out of their heads. So if you're dealing with the real world, what do you want to do? You want to ring-fence that capacity and put them as far from actually being able to build a bomb as possible. And forgive me, I just cannot see how that's not in Israel's interest.
Ari, you said that this deal virtually legitimizes Iran as a nuclear power, not next year, but in 10 to 15 years. And this is not just a right-wing position. This is mainstream position. I mean, the fears in Israel are on both sides of the political divide, across the political divide, correct?
That is true, but if I may, my concern about Iran is not just an Israeli concern. I think that one of the great mistakes done by my prime minister was to make Iran an Israel issue. Iran should have never been an Israel issue. In my mind, Iran, if Iran goes nuclear, it's a challenge to world order, to world peace, to the West, to our civilization. It's not about Israeli security, although it's relevant to Israeli security. I must say, Roger, that one of the things that I find striking is, I think that being liberal is respecting other people's opinions. I don't think that liberals are supposed to be submitted to some sort of liberal totalitarian thinking, where we all have to think alike.
I agree.
The whole point. Okay. So I actually think I don't understand the divide on this issue between, so to speak, progress. I don't think this should be. This is not pro-life, this is not minimum wage, this is not human rights. This is about an analysis of reality. So I actually think I find it something troubling about this division between, so to speak, the fact that a progressive is concerned about Iran. That should be natural. I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but that should not be an issue. Now, let me say where I stand on this. First of all, this discussion is, too late and too early. We cannot impact, the deal is a done deal. And we'll know who was right in 10, 15 years. And in many ways, we are like in a kind of limbo right now. So let me give you my version, the short history of this. I think that we should have all, the question is not the deal. The deal was an outcome of a decade-long failure by America, Israel, and the West. We should have all focused on the Iranian issue as early as 2002. The major problem, the major mistake regarding Iran was the Iraq War. And I'm not saying it only now, I said it in real time. I said there was a terrible spelling mistake in your foreign policy. Because you took, after 9/11, where we are not far from this part of the world, you took all your energy and vibrancy as a superpower on the wrong war, in the wrong time, in the wrong country. The real threat to the Middle East and the real threat to the world was Iran. It's far more serious than any of the other Middle East countries. And the solution to Iran was not war. There was no need for war. You needed assertive diplomacy. The Iranians should have been confronted with a John Kennedy kind of approach of either give up your project or face economical siege. This was the right approach. But all the energy went into this ridiculous war, and all the oxygen was sucked out of the room, and people didn't have the energy to concentrate on Iran when we could have dealt with this rather easily. So this, and by the way, Israel made mistakes just as much as America. We made, and I won't go into the entire history, we all didn't focus on the right issue. So what happened when it came to the deal? We basically lost the technological war against Iran. This is what you are saying. But what is the problem? The greatest success of President Obama's policy were the sanctions, because the Iranians basically won the technological war, but lost the economical war, because the sanction policy led by the Obama administration was so successful. Now just think of what would have happened if we would have waited with this Vienna Accord 9 months, with oil prices where they are today. The Iranians would have been they would have been on their knees. No doubt the deal would have been much better in March or June of 2016 than it was last summer. So I'm not about attacking Iran, about a war, about all these crazy ideas. I think that within the context of what we all believe in, we could have all been much smarter. Now, I think this should not be, as I said, a partisan issue, not in Israel, not here, not in Europe. Everybody made mistakes. Sharon and Olmert and Netanyahu, we all made mistakes. And Republicans and Democrats. So let's not make it one more narrow partisan issue. And the issue now is to look forward, because the deal is a done deal. And I think that what can be done at this time is to define very clearly what are the red lines. I hope you are right, and I pray the president's strategic gamble on transforming Iran will work. But if we want that, and I think, if I was advising President Obama, I would say this is the most important thing for the president himself. Because if something goes wrong and your scenario is disrupted, his legacy will be in danger. So I pray that under the leadership of this administration and with the next administration, and hopefully if we have some reasonable Israeli government one day, we will define now very harsh red lines, so the Iranians know they cannot cross them.
Okay,
so if they are I'll just finish it. So if they go your way, great. I'll be the first one to salute and celebrate. But we have to be alert to keep the intelligence resources, to have very clear criteria of when they are cheating, and not to lie to ourselves. Because the West is so much stronger than Iran. Our weakness is lack of willpower and lack of willingness to see reality as it is. If we'll be sober, if we'll go with our eyes open, we shall overcome this challenge.
Okay, so then what lines would have to be crossed? But at that point, is there anything that can really be done? I mean, the genie's out of the bottle. What line would have to be crossed, and what at that point can then be done about it?
Well, Iran has to stick to the stipulations of the agreement, which holds those centrifuges at a very low number, denies it the right to have any highly enriched uranium or even enriched uranium beyond a very low quantity. And I think the Obama administration is intensely aware, to Ari's point, that this is a very important part of the Obama legacy. And if this is not stringently enforced, then it's going to look like a fiasco. You have right now the most intrusive international inspection regime ever applied to any nuclear program in Iran. Iran is a member of the IAEA. IAEA inspectors are in Iran 24 hours a day, 24/7 at every single facility. And that's going to go on for the next decade. So I think the red line element is built into the agreement, if the agreement is stringently observed, and I certainly hope that it will be. I am very skeptical, Ari, having been in Iran more than once, of the notion that you can bring this country to its knees, as you just said. You don't bring a country like Iran to its knees, short of all-out war, and I don't think any of us want that. It's a proud nation. It's a nation of 80 million people. It's not a country drawn on a map by dyspeptic British bureaucrats at the beginning of the 20th century. It's a 5,000-year-old nation. And you find the latest gadgets. I mean, after years of sanctions, you find anything you want to find in Tehran. There are a lot of borders. There are a lot of people in Dubai and in the Gulf who want to trade with Iran. And I think sanctions took us a long way, but they took us about as far as we could get. They took us to the point where a deal could be negotiated. And what the deal shows about Iran, in my view, is that right now there's a very delicate balance between the hardliners, represented by the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Rouhani and Zarif, the president and the foreign minister, who represent a more liberal wing. And this deal would never have happened if Khamenei felt sufficiently secure of his power to feel that he could simply dispense with the president and the foreign minister. And similarly, because of the divisions in Iranian society, the president and foreign minister needed the other faction. So it's a very delicate moment in Iran. There are elections coming up. And again, I think that it is possible, it is not inevitable, but it is possible that greater contact with the world will have, in general, a liberalizing influence on Iran rather than the contrary. And Khamenei, remember, is heading for 80. He's not going to be around forever. Rouhani must certainly be a candidate for the succession. So we will see. I simply think that, you know, I take the point that errors were made. I agree with Ari. Errors were made. Certainly errors were made. I don't think going to war with Iran in 2003 would have been a good choice either. Maybe we should have avoided both wars. And remember also, Ari, that Iran, a Shia power, had helped us out in Afghanistan, helped us in Mazar-e-Sharif, helped us in the aftermath, helped us in the organization of the country after that. So to turn on Iran immediately after that and go to war would have been strange. Iraq was a huge mistake and a huge distraction from Afghanistan at a moment when the war in Afghanistan in its initial year had actually gone pretty well.
Oh, did you?
So I made specifically the point there was no need whatsoever for war against Iran. It's very clear. I said with assertive diplomacy, this could have been resolved years back, and it became much more difficult as the years have passed. I don't want to spend too much time on this. There is so much to be said. I'll say two things. First, if people in this audience are not aware of it, Iran attacked this country with cyber warfare in a serious way in the last year. If the feeling in Tehran will be that you can attack the United States and get away with it, and the administration has a vested interest now in a deal to pretend everything is okay, then the chances of this deal going terribly wrong will increase dramatically. The only way to make this deal work, now we're all united, we want this deal to work. The only way to make this is to stop the politics. To stop the politics are now endangering the strategy. Because if the Republicans and the Likudniks all the time are after the pro-deal people to say, we told you so, and the pro-deal people are all the time, okay, we were right, we all play into the Iranians' hand. So let's go back to old-fashioned bipartisanship. Let's stop all this ridiculous debates. Now we must unite, and we must have this kind of assertiveness now at least. The deal is done. We are giving it a chance. We hope Roger is right. We hope Ari is wrong. All of us, including Ari. But now let's work and stop this ridiculous, look, this venom, this poison of petty politics destroying any rational policy throughout the West is a major problem for our political life now. So this is so important, let's stop it. Just one point. There was a subtext to your text that I want to object to. I'm an Israeli, but I care about my Arab neighbors. I respect my Arab neighbors. And I don't want to act with arrogance regarding people, leaders, who were America's best friends for dozens of years, were Israel's best friends, and sometimes paid even with their life for peace with Israel or with alliance with America. You don't throw these people out the window. You don't throw these people out. People, when Mubarak was there, American public opinion was so outraged by the use of some police forces in Cairo. But when there was a revolt, a Persian revolt against this regime in 2009, we did nothing. Where does this hypocrisy come from? Why are those tyrants who are America's friends condemned, and those tyrants who fought America for such a long time praised? Why are we indifferent to human rights, terrible human rights violations in Iran? We have to see the Middle East as it is. I have deep respect for the Iranian people, for the Iranian civilization, for the Iranian Republic. I'm really worried about the Iranian regime. But if the perception in the Middle East will be that America is betraying all its old partners, and there is a kind of the Middle East is a politically incorrect region. People think in politically incorrect terms. And the perception right now throughout the Middle East is that America / the Christians are having an alliance with the Shiites against the Sunnis. This is the most dangerous perception one can think of. You want peace in Palestine and Israel? You want stability in this region? If the perception is that America is betraying the Sunnis, God forbid what will happen. ISIS is just the beginning. ISIS's symptom is of this syndrome. But even if we'll crush ISIS, we'll have the next ISIS. So let's go back and maintain the old American Sunni alliance in a kind of new reformed way. We don't have to accept any tyranny. But let's not make this deal that was done with Iran into some sort of religion that we despise the Arabs, we will treat them with contempt, while we admire these Iranian fundamentalists.
Ari, with respect, I think that's really exaggerated. I really do not see the end of the Egyptian-American. There have been some strains, but relations between Egypt and the United States remain pretty strong. And the Saudis have been pretty curious allies to the United States over the past 14 years. You can make a pretty powerful case that more harm has been done to the United States by the Saudis than by any other Middle Eastern power. And if you're talking about ISIS, I think the links between ISIS and the Saudis and the role that Saudi Wahhabism, Saudi madrasas, Saudi funding has had in the role, in the persistence of this metastasizing anti-Western, murderous anti-Western ideology that we've just seen in the streets of Paris and San Bernardino. Well, I think the Saudis have a lot that they need to answer for.
Okay, I'd like to, if I may, I'd like to...
And to make the case that Iran has harmed the United States more than the Saudis over the last 14 years, I think that's also a tough case to make.
I'm sad to say that I think you've just proven my point. When this dialogue, if this is published or spread around the Middle East, it will prove to the 85% of Muslims who happen to be Sunnis my point. Because this means that the subtext under America's policy, it's one deal, one issue to say there is no other way, we have to strike this technical deal to save the day. It's another thing to make it into a kind of religion of admiring the alliance with the Shiites. Because as we see, the Sunni-Shiite divide is so deep. It's the most important phenomenon right now in the Middle East. And I tell you, you have your doubts, I'll tell you. The way the Arabs now speak about America frightens me. It frightens me. They feel betrayed. They feel cheated. America has right now too many orphans in the Middle East. And the good news, by the way, is that because of that, Arabs and Israelis are closer than we were ever. It's what they sometimes call the alliance of the orphans. You know, but I'm happy about the fact that the Arabs are closer to us. But I am, first of all, when I'm in this country, I have so much gratitude to America. I admire America, most of my American friends. And there is no substitute for American leadership. The most important city in the Middle East is Washington. And if Washington doesn't get it, the Middle East goes crazy. So it is so important. Okay, the deal was done. Let's keep it restricted. Let's keep it conditional. And let's work with the majority of Sunnis throughout the Middle East. Let them not feel betrayed. You talked about China. I'm afraid that the real implication, if this goes on, the real implication will be that sooner or later, the Middle East will go to China. If there is no American leadership, Putin and the Chinese will fill the vacuum. They're already doing it, and they'll do much more of that. So let's, again, I'm an Israeli. I speak here for the Arabs. Don't neglect the Arabs. Don't despise the Arabs. And don't betray the Arabs.
Okay, so turning to the less controversial issue of Arab-Palestinian-Israeli peace process. Can Washington have any influence over the next year? I mean, the president has less than a year left in office. Do you see anything happening, any movement on the Israeli-Palestinian front? Is it on life support? Is the two-state solution? I mean, Isaac Herzog said just today or yesterday that even he doesn't see the two-state solution being a viable option for the foreseeable future.
Well, Linda, I think the Obama administration and Secretary of State Kerry made a tremendous effort, including dozens of visits to the area by Secretary Kerry. And it all unraveled yet again. We had a third Gaza war in 6 years, another 2,500 or so people dead for nothing. And I think the Obama administration and the president have reached a point where they're not interested in having the fig leaf of a peace process that is not really a process and certainly doesn't lead to peace. And I think the president's position at this point, with a center-right Israeli government that includes members who talk openly about...
Is there a center there?
Well, I was trying to be polite. A government that includes members who talk openly of annexing wide areas, if not all, of the West Bank, who are openly dismissive of the notion of the Palestinians as a people at all, with an aging Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, with continuing incitement on the Palestinian side, with reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas turning out to be just empty words, with all Abbas's talk about possible elections also turning out to be empty words. And now, with the simmering violence, the stabbings, talk of a third intifada, and that is the status quo, ladies and gentlemen. People talk about the status quo, and status quo kind of implies something immobile, maybe something even quiescent, but the status quo is violent. It is inherently violent. You cannot have a situation where millions of people are living in a situation where they feel oppressed and humiliated year after year after year. I think people basically want to be free. You can hit them over the head once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. They may not react. But the 6th or 7th time, they will react. And they'll take somebody down with them, even if that means the end of their own life. So given all that, and given the poisonous personal relations between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu, who placed himself in the middle of American politics on the Iranian issue and other issues, openly sided with Mitt Romney during the last campaign. I mean, all that obviously has left a certain amount of bitterness. And
can I ask you?
And so, you know, given all that, I think in the last year it would be illusory to think, or it would be to believe in miracles, and I do tend to believe that miracles are possible, but to think that in the remaining year we're going to see serious negotiation or some kind of breakthrough, I think that's really highly unlikely. The fundamental problem remains. I mean, Israel, Secretary Kerry refers now to a one-state reality. I saw Ambassador Shapiro refer to the looming possibility of a binational state. We all know that for demographic reasons, Israel cannot remain Jewish and democratic in the current scenario. So the urgency, the dilemma is there. And even if we grow numb because we cannot see a way forward, that urgency, to my mind, exists for anybody who loves and believes in the importance of the Jewish state of Israel.
I don't doubt that, and you've said it many times, and you refer to it in your articles, your love for Israel. But you have been a harsh critic of Israel and Israeli.
I've been a critic of Israel.
Of Israeli government policy, if you will. I guess my question is, to what extent?
Where does the harshness lie?
Where does the heart? Well, let's say that.
Anyway, you're asking the questions. I apologize.
The question is, to what extent can we blame the Palestinians for some of what is happening here? I mean, you know, we're watching this grotesque wave of stabbings in the streets of Israel. You know, return to tunnel building in Gaza, numerous offers for a two-state solution that have been rejected over the last 20 years. I mean, the conversations both here and in many of the articles, not just yours, I feel take us back 20 years. I mean, there's been 20 years of history and 20 years of a growth of a kind of extremism. And I think it's only fair to ask, why aren't the Palestinians at least half the blame for where we are today? I mean, perhaps.
Well, you talk of it 20 years ago, and of course, Linda, 20 years ago, the Prime Minister of Israel was assassinated, and was assassinated by a messianic Jew who believed that all the land of Israel had been deeded to Israel thousands of years ago, and bad luck if some other people happened to live there. And of course, Prime Minister Rabin's conclusion was a reluctant conclusion. He had fought these people. He had a, I think deep inside himself, he loathed the man that he had to shake hands with. But like the characters we meet in that wonderful movie, The Gatekeepers, who've been thinking about Israeli security all their lives, he concluded that this was just not tenable, that at a certain point you have to try to reach a peace, to make an agreement. And of course, Ben-Gurion in 1970 said that peace is more important than real estate. And what has been lost in those 20 years, and I'll get to the Palestinian side, but on the Israeli side, I think what has been lost, and there are reasons for it, but I do not see that conviction driving certainly the policy of Prime Minister Netanyahu. There is no good faith effort, in my view, to try and reach a two-state outcome. And that, for me, was certainly demonstrated at the time when Prime Minister Fayyad was leading the government in the West Bank. I mean, here was a man, US educated, highly trained, highly presentable, passionate believer in a two-state outcome, actually doing things on the West Bank, cleaning up corruption, making the economy work as far as it can in those conditions. And what was Israel's reaction to him? Israel's reaction to him was that he was a unilateralist. I mean, for Netanyahu, he was the Palestinian from hell because he was presentable. He was everything that Israel spent so much energy trying to tell the world that the Palestinians are not. So the Fayyad opening was lost. It was lost also because Fatah failed to embrace him. And here we get to the Palestinians. The Palestinian leadership is sclerotic. They refuse the tough choices. They prefer theater to reality. And in Hamas, they have a wing still bent on the destruction of Israel. Now, if I believed, and all that, yes, makes trying to find somebody with whom to persuasively talk peace very difficult. But if I believed that Israel had been in good faith, if I believed that at the time of Fayyad there had been a genuine attempt at outreach, if I thought for a moment that this government, Israeli government, had any serious interest in peace, then of course your argument would be entirely persuasive. As it is, I think there's plenty of blame to go on both sides, and I have no real issue with a 50-50 allocation. I mean, we can argue about how you want to allocate the blame. I think on both sides, I don't know how they sleep well at night, when all the lives needlessly lost. And it comes down to what in the end? It comes down, there's narrative in the title of our talk this evening. Narrative doesn't put food on the table. Narrative doesn't cure anything. Narrative may be pleasing to read. Narrative may be uplifting. Narrative is not the future. Israelis and Palestinians can disagree until the end of time about what happened in 1948, what happened at Lydda. The important thing is to place those children around the dinner table and the future of Palestinian and Israeli kids above the sterile arguments of the past.
Ari, would we be in a different place if the Zionist Union Party was leading the government? I mean,
I'll of course answer the question, but I want to refer, I think we had serious matters raised in your previous question, what Roger said. So let me not get into a debate, but let me really try to do some personal soul searching on three different dimensions. First of all, the progressive mind. It has to do with the Iranian issue before, and it's so relevant here. I was so happy that you were able to extract from Roger some criticism of Palestinians. But when I generally read the progressive media in Israel, in America, in Europe, the main flaw, the main problem is an inherent difficulty in addressing third world evil. I don't understand, again, why being a liberal means that you have to be blind to tyranny, to oppression, to aggression, to fundamentalism, to fascism in third world countries. And I almost agree to everything written in leading American, European, and Israeli publications in criticism of my prime minister, my government, Israeli policies. But I always miss the other part. Abbas is somehow sanctified. Netanyahu was horrible in the peace process. But in the end of the day, it was Mahmoud Abbas who made President Obama so angry in the Oval Office. He broke it at the end. Now, until we find in us the integrity and courage to criticize Abbas and the Palestinians, just as we criticize Netanyahu, we won't bring about the Palestinian conversion needed for real peace. So this kind of overprotective approach, where we think that we defend the cause of peace by turning a blind eye to half of reality, it's morally wrong, it's intellectually wrong, and it's politically counterproductive. Now my soul searching as an Israeli. I totally agree with what you said, but if I may, I'll say it in a bit more dramatic way because it's my country. There is no way that Israel can remain a Jewish democratic state as long as we have occupation. Except for my beloved wife and children and some dear family members and friends. There is nothing more dear to me than the Jewish democratic state. I can really get emotional about the Zionist project and the moral imperative of having a home for the homeless people. But what are these ultra-nationalist Israelis doing? They are destroying our national home. The whole point about Zionism was to have one place where we'll have an overwhelming Jewish majority so we can define ourselves politically as a people within a democratic context. That's the whole thing. We have so many Jewish minorities around the world. The Jewish minority in this country is so prospering in so many ways. But we wanted one place where we'll have sovereignty. These people who are building settlements and going to these hills, they're not only being unjust to the Palestinians, taking whatever left of the country. They are being unjust to us. The settlers are the ultimate anti-Zionists. They're endangering the Zionist project from within. So the need to stop this process, first of all, to freeze settlements, to stop settlement activity, and then to gradually work towards a two-state solution is essential. It's a moral imperative and it's a political imperative. It's a matter of life and death for Israel. Now, the last element, my soul searching as a peacenik. Although the right, this messianic, irrational right, is the one that created the problem, we have to admit that we made some mistakes too. The leftists, so to speak, as we say in Israel, the peace camp in Israel, and the international community was totally right about occupation and settlement. But we were wrong in promising a perfect peace that was not there. there was a kind of logical leap. We were right about occupation, but we tried that piece so many times. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. So then Netanyahu doesn't count. But what Ehud Barak did in 2000 does count. What Rabin and Peres did does count. What Ehud Olmert did does count. And it didn't work. It's time when you run into the wall once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. It's time to understand there is a wall there. There was some problem with our own concept. On top of that came the Arab chaos. So when Israelis, reasonable, middle-of-the-road Israelis look around, they say, we tried Oslo, it ended with terror. We tried Camp David, it ended with suicide bombing. We tried disengagement, it ended with rockets in Tel Aviv. And now we have all Arab nation states falling apart all around us. So if we want to save Israel, if we want to end occupation, we need a new peace concept. We have to understand we made some mistakes. We have to understand there is a brutal reality out there. I won't outline my alternative peace, but the essence of it, the two-state vision is essential. The two-state option must be kept, and two-state dynamics must be launched right now, even if there is no two-state solution tomorrow morning. So we must begin with what President Obama began in 2009. First of all, a settlement freeze. Then a Marshall Plan for Gaza. Water to Gaza, power stations, housing in Gaza. Rebuild Gaza. And then gradually work on a new framework. And this is where I need my Arab friends. I need the Saudis that you don't like. You cannot like them. I have to live with them. I want the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Gulf countries as my allies in a new kind of peace process that will gradually, not overnight, end occupation, because otherwise Israel is in mortal danger.
I know that your plan and your passion resonates certainly with this audience, and there are many people here and outside this room in this country who are passionate about Israel and the Zionist enterprise. But as you know, with this paralysis and impasse in the peace process, there is a growing disconnect in the American Jewish community, growing frustration among young American Jews. You've met them on the American college campus. We'll talk about that. Weakening of identification with the Jewish state. Many young people, young Jews, blaming Israel for this impasse. How concerned are you about this wedge being driven between Israel and the millennials, the young American Jewish
You're taking me from one of my passions to another. Look, as you know, and I think some people perhaps here know, much of my last 2 years were spent actually within this great country, and I traveled throughout this great American Jewish community. But the last year, I concentrated on your younger generation. I've been to 40, perhaps 50 American campuses. And briefly say, I admire your community so much. I admire everything that was achieved here. I think that not only Israel is a man-made miracle, I think that the perfect diaspora you created here is a man-made miracle. And I admire Jewish life in this country just as I admire Jewish life in Israel. But the threat facing your community is the generation gap. It's a dramatic gap. And I sometimes say, largely, generally speaking, people over 70 have the Holocaust as their context and are religiously committed to Jewish life in Israel. And people over 50, they whine and grind, but they cannot help it. They have a strong Jewish identity, and they remember pre-67 Israel, and they're with it. The millennials, people under 30, are in a different world. So many of them are split. They have a yearning because of their upbringing, because of birthright, because of all kinds of things. They still have warmth, and they want to love Israel. But Israel becomes gradually an embarrassing relative. They cannot understand occupation. They cannot understand settlement. They cannot understand church and state issue. Israel is perceived as a Goliath. I don't think it is, but this is how it is perceived. But again, to be fair, and you have to understand it, Israel is not the only Goliath in the room. Many of them have a complicated relationship with Jewish success in this country. In campuses that are all now about power and privilege, not only Israel is a problem, but Jewish success. There is tension between the success of this minority and the fact that some other minorities didn't succeed so much. It's a deep, sensitive, serious issue. What happens, and this is why I'm so angry at my government, that 90% of young American Jews have progressive values. They have universal values. Israel is perceived as tribal, and in many cases, Jewish organized life is perceived as tribal. And then what Israel does, it alienates them. Israel's mission is not only to have life there. We have to be a source of energy, of inspiration to young Jews throughout the world. The point about Israel is that ultra-Orthodox Jews don't need Israel. They can survive without Israel. But non-ultra-Orthodox Jews, even to have thriving communities in Cleveland and Detroit and Chicago and San Francisco, you need that other place that will help you with that mission of maintaining the identity. And Israel, contemporary Israel, is betraying its mission. So the issue on campuses is not BDS. BDS is evil, vicious. BDS is just using our weakness because we have not given our youngsters the right kind of narrative. And we did not prove to them that we are a David, not a Goliath. Because of that, so many of them are confused and torn. They don't have enough relevant rabbis. They don't have enough leaders. They don't get the inspiration they need. So I think this is the most dramatic, with all the issues of the Middle East, and you heard me concerned about some Middle East issues. I think that the most dramatic issue now facing the Jewish people is this one. What's happening now on campuses is as important as anything happening on Israel's borders. This is where the real battle for the Jewish future is. So I call upon all of us to work together. We must reform Israel because without that it won't work, but that won't be enough. We need, and I'm frustrated by the fact that elements of the Jewish leadership in this country don't get it. They stick to a kind of old Israel narrative and Jewish narrative, Holocaust, Israel, Ari ben Canaan, Exodus. Not relevant. Not relevant. So it's in this sense, our headline, it's essential to rewrite the new relevant Jewish narrative, and it's essential to change Israel and to work together, these two great Jewish communities where 83% of world Jewry is. We don't have a future without you. You will not have a future without us. We have to work together on dealing with this issue because this is at the heart of our existence.
While I ask a couple more questions, I'm going to invite people in the audience, those of you who have questions, to please start lining up at the microphones on either side of the room. Ari, it's apparently not even just the Jewish young people. There are reports, in fact, Gary Rosenblatt wrote an article recently about many Jewish leaders, the Jewish establishment, having a hard time themselves knowing how to defend Israel anymore. Maybe not saying it publicly, but privately. Even the Jewish establishment is having a hard time. I mean, is anything going to change here until things change in your country? I mean, until there is movement, is it going to? Are we going to be able to help our young people on campus explain why Israel, while not a perfect state, but what state is a perfect state, is still a liberal, democratic, country?
I think.
No, I was actually going to say that I'll be brief because I'm sure Roger will defend his.
No, I agree completely with what Ari's been saying, but I think the tragic thing is that the vibrancy and the amazing economic success and all the variegated texture of Israeli society that you feel when you're in Tel Aviv and you just look at the streets, and there's an amazing sort of mixture of humanity there, and it's and you think that 100 years ago there was nothing. Too much of this, so much of this, just gets hidden by the fact of the continuing occupation, the fact of the continuing expansion of settlements, statements from the government that seem incredibly harsh, and so these, I think it's very hard to and I think Israel had a big public relations campaign, and they asked me about it, and I said, well, it's just very hard in the current political situation to change the perception, to change the narrative. And at the time of the last Gaza war, it was very striking, Linda, that in every demographic there was strong support for Israel, but in the, I think, 18 to 25 demographic, no, not at all. And, we had a piece today, I'm not sure if it was in the paper or just online, about this novel, Border Life, which involves, Israeli novel, which involves an Israeli woman, right? Is it? I can't remember which way around it is. An Israeli woman falls in love with an Arab man. And the novel is about this. And the novel was barred from high school reading lists. And so there's this whole, debate that's erupted, with the right saying it's bad for Israel. We don't want to give an example of romance between a Jew and an Arab, and anyway, they can't legally marry in Israel. And Haaretz came out and said, I've just bought 5 copies because this is so ridiculous. But, again, I think subliminally you're reading about the most liberal and democratic state in the Middle East, and suddenly, well, the book wasn't quite banned, but, subliminally it's sort of, the debate is closing down to the point that you can't even freely read a novel in school. NGOs are being investigated in case there's foreign funding of them. There seems to be a closing of the Israeli mind. I don't think it's really true, but that's the perception. And I think the openness and the flourishing of an open culture in Israel is so important to be able to talk positively about the country. And that's why I think the right, the nationalist, messianic right, it's very unfortunate the degree of power and influence that they have attained within Israel. I'm not sure how it's reversed any more than, to your earlier point, I'm not sure how we get over the polarization of politics in this country and elsewhere.
Roger and Ari, I want to thank you both for a most inspiring, insightful, fascinating, difficult, never easy conversation, for helping to inform our views on these complicated issues. Thanks to the Jewish Week newspaper and to Tel Aviv University for co-sponsoring this event and bringing these issues directly to our community. Ari and Roger will be signing and they will be selling their book in the lobby after they leave the stage. Thank you all for coming, and good night.
Thank you so much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.